This program contains scenes that have been dramatized, with special attention given to historical accuracy.
Anything would have set him off. He was a coiled spring.
It's one of the strangest assassination plots in history.
I'll do it, even if it means my self-destruction.
The target is the 37th President of the United States.
The government does not have the desire to correct this disease. I will cut it out.
The problem the Secret Service encountered is he stayed below the radar.
The plan is to hit the president right where he lives.
Authorities were completely unprepared for what happened.
Now, the unknown story, told by the assassin himself.
This government does not have the ability to cleanse itself, and I will cleanse it by fire.
February 22nd, 1974, 4:45 a.m. Just outside Baltimore, Washington International Airport. A man is on his way to assassinate the 37th President of the United States, Richard M. Nixon. But first, he wants to make sure the world understands his actions. He mails audio cassettes to several famous people, including composer Leonard Bernstein, author Benjamin Spock, and Connecticut Senator Abraham Ribicoff. In the days ahead, one of the packages arrives at the Philadelphia Inquirer offices of reporter Dan Lynch.
If you work on a big newspaper and you've got a byline in prominent places, you're going to receive a lot of nut mail. So every day when you come to work, you go to your mailbox and it's an adventure. On this day I found a tape that had been addressed to Carol Channing, the actress, with my return address. It was not my handwriting. I knew I hadn't sent it, and that was the first piece of mail I was going to pay attention to.
If my plan goes well, shortly you will be reading quite a bit about me. If my plan doesn't go well, it won't make much of a damn difference. I'm giving it to you step by step. That way, if I'm...
The voice belongs to 44-year-old Philadelphia resident Samuel Byck. He's unique among presidential assassins in the way he documents his thoughts on tape.
I want you to know something more about me.
This was designed to be Sam's posthumous manifesto. This was going to be his explanation to the world as to why he had done these things.
Yes, but I feel that if a man is dead and his ideas are passed off from one person to another, then he is in some way still alive.
Samuel Byck is born in Philadelphia in 1930 to working-class parents, the oldest of three brothers. He is educated in Philadelphia's public school system and is an average student.
Sam could be funny. Sam liked a joke, if the joke wasn't on him. Generally, he was perceived to be hard to handle. He had a short fuse. You said the wrong thing to him at the right time, and you heard about it immediately. We get a game together, a football game. If he passed the ball to somebody, the fellow didn't catch the ball or what, well, he would absolutely have a tirade over this thing. I mean, he would really lose it.
Byck graduates from Philadelphia's only high school in 1948. By the mid-1960s, Byck remains in Philadelphia and becomes the married father of 4 children. He struggles with depression and finds it difficult to hold a steady job. He occasionally works as a tire salesman for his only friend, Frankie Jones.
Why can't I just catch a break?
Your time will come. You do, man.
Thanks.
Sam Byck was very depressed about 2 things. One was his employment difficulties, which were profound. I mean, this guy could not hold a job, and as a consequence, strains developed in his marriage.
Once again, in peace and mutual respect.
In the fall of 1968, Byck's finances and relationship with his wife continue to fall apart. Meanwhile, a presidential campaign captures the attention of the nation.
America is in trouble today, not because her people have failed, but because her leaders have failed.
This will solve all our problems.
Do you really think they'll approve it?
Byck pins his hopes on a business idea he believes will make him rich and turn his life around.
Millions of Americans cry out in anguish.
And he had this grandiose plan. As I recall, it was renting or buying a bus and then driving through supermarket parking lots selling tires. And he was going to install the tires on the lot for the people, and he thought this was a chance to make $1 million.
Who is the one man?
To turn his dream into reality, Byck applies for a $20,000 loan from the Small Business Administration.
Nixon's the one.
In January 1969, Byck is still waiting for an answer from the SBA when Richard Nixon assumes the office of president.
Richard Nixon was a uniquely divisive figure. Nixon had been hated by large numbers of people in this country since the time he ran for Congress back in the early 50s. When Richard Nixon was in the White House, he was there primarily because he had promised to end the war. People were still coming home in body bags at a fairly snappy pace every week.
Our defeat and humiliation in South Vietnam, without question, would promote recklessness in the councils of those great powers who have not yet abandoned their goals of world conquest. A nation cannot remain great if it betrays its allies and lets down its friends.
11 months into Nixon's presidency, November 1969, Samuel Byck still has not heard from the SBA about his business loan. His depression becomes severe enough that he checks himself into Philadelphia's Friends Hospital.
I'm categorized as a manic depressant. I have my highs, my lows, and I take lithium carbonate to stabilize myself.
Our mood swings are triggered by reality. We get good news, we're up. We get bad news, we go down. With Sam, the mood swings are internally triggered by a chemical imbalance, and they far exceed any of ours.
While in the hospital, Byck receives a reply from the SBA about his loan application. The news devastates him.
May I say first that on the national scene, time enough for minutes.
I believe the SBA is totally corrupt. The people who have the power to manipulate the law don't want liberty and justice for all. The American success is the ones that are the best cheats, the best thieves.
He'd been a man with big dreams. Those dreams hadn't worked out. He was embittered. He was looking for somebody to blame. And the person he blamed was the person who was roundly hated by so many other people, Richard Milhouse Nixon.
In December 1969, after a month-long stay, Byck leaves the hospital. He becomes an outpatient and struggles to manage his manic depression.
Those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. Am I mad? I doubt it. I look at the world around me, and I see after tens and thousands of years, men are still killing each other. I think maybe the world is mad. I think maybe the world has gone mad.
Byck continues to focus on President Nixon as the cause of his ill fortune.
Byck, like many other assassins, wants to focus on the highest level of symbol and notoriety that there can be. Once you are committed to dramatizing your plight or acting out your rage. It's more enticing to go for the President of the United States, who is the highest political figure and symbol in our land.
I've seen thousands of young people, and I can tell you that the radical few that you see on your television screens night after night, they're not a majority of American youth today, and they will not be the leaders of America tomorrow.
Toward the end of Nixon's first term in 1972, Sam Byck separates from his wife and is still unemployed. Living on a monthly disability check of $189, he moves into an apartment in Philadelphia's Bustleton section. He withdraws socially and sinks further into depression.
He didn't have a job, he didn't have a wife, he didn't have a family, so he was cut off from human attachments and from meaning. And then he began to create his own world of meaning, and that's when he got dangerous.
5 men were arrested at 2:30 a.m.
Byck continues to obsess about the SBA loan rejection, even though it happened 3 years earlier. He continues to blame President Nixon for ruining his life.
The break-in occurred at the Watergate office.
And on June 17, 1972, an event occurs that will intensify Byck's hatred of the president.
The suspects were caught after the Watergate building's security guard.
5 men are arrested after breaking into the Washington offices of the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate office building.
They attempted to plant bugs and photograph documents in the offices of the Democratic...
What shaped Byck's actions were the revelations of Watergate corruption. Here was a guy who had been denied a Small Business Administration loan, and then just coincidentally, a couple of years later, he finds out that this Nixon administration that had turned down his loan is a very corrupt administration.
Head of President Nixon's re-election committee.
Months after the Watergate break-in, an FBI investigation points to several White House officials.
Behalf or with its consent.
But Watergate has little bearing on the 1972 presidential campaign, as Nixon leads Democratic Party nominee George McGovern in the polls.
Rhode Island, where I will be about 3 hours from now, want the same thing for their children, and that is a world of peace. Let me address myself, however, to a question that one member of my staff raised this morning to the effect that why are details important?
Look, there he is again.
Why not just make an agreement and sign it? Because that would be really
somebody ought to kill Nixon. We'd all be better off, don't you think?
For the next generation, rather than peace with surrender, let's have peace with honor for the United States.
Based on an anonymous tip, the Secret Service learn of Byck's barroom threat.
Samuel Byck?
Yes?
We're Secret Service. I'd like to ask you a few questions, please.
You make a threat against the president, you're going to be interviewed, if not by Secret Service, certainly by the police, and they're going to begin using various criteria to evaluate just how serious a threat is this person. Does the individual have a history of violence? Does the individual, own firearms?
Mr. Byck, the other night you're in a bar in downtown Philadelphia, and you overheard saying someone had to kill Nixon.
Oh, look, I may have been a little loaded. You know, the booze mixed with my medication.
Medication?
I'm manic depressive. I take pills for it.
Are you seeing a psychiatrist, Mr. Byck?
Yes.
Secret Service agents later interview Byck's psychiatrist, but take no further action.
The psychiatrist who evaluated him, as well as the Secret Service, in different reports said, this is a guy, he's a big talker, but he's essentially harmless.
November 7th, 1972. President Nixon is reelected in a landslide. While Nixon celebrates, Sam Byck spends the 1972 holiday season alone. His manic depression sinking him so low, he contemplates suicide.
I will shortly be 44 years old. I'm fat, maybe 70 pounds overweight. I have a bad back. Life is like an exciting party, but to hang around too long is to outlive your welcome. I'd rather live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep.
Days into 1973, a news story captures Byck's dark imagination. On January 8, 1973, a former sailor named Mark Jimmy Essex shoots 6 people dead from the rooftop of a New Orleans hotel. Essex is killed by police. In Essex's apartment, police later find violent political epithets on the wall, several of them directed toward President Nixon.
What captured Byck's attention was the fact that he had slogans, "Kill the pig Nixon," on the wall. I think at that point, Byck said, hey, this is a way to go. Look at the publicity that Mark Jimmy Essex got for what he did, and he was killing ordinary people. Would I get as much publicity as he did for killing 6 ordinary people if I took out the President of the United States?
A month after the Essex incident, and 4 days before President Nixon's second inauguration, Samuel Byck drives 140 miles to Washington, D.C.
It seems pretty clear he was looking at that time for an opportunity to kill the president.
January 1973. President Richard M. Nixon is about to be inaugurated for a second term. Days before the inauguration, 43-year-old Samuel Byck, an unemployed tire salesman from Philadelphia, drives from his home to Washington, D.C. His intention is to assassinate the president.
We know that he talked to construction workers working on the inauguration site. He talked to security people very casually, of course, inquiring about where the president would be and where things were going to happen.
But Samuel Byck is intimidated by the security precautions taken on the day of the event. As Nixon launches his second term of office, Byck returns to Philadelphia. Days later, Byck drops in on his friend, Frankie Jones, at the tire store where he once worked. But it is Byck who gets an unexpected visit.
Mr. Byck?
Yeah?
We have some questions for you concerning your activities for the last few days.
I'm going to talk to these guys for a couple minutes.
The Secret Service know from an anonymous source that Byck left Philadelphia in the days before the inauguration.
Lots of people go on trips. So, Carolina.
I think the reason that no one detected this potential violent behavior is Sam was smart enough to mask it.
I was on a peace mission.
He was controlling himself, during the interviews, and essentially telling Secret Service and the doctors what they wanted to hear.
Are you still under psychiatric care, Mr. Byck?
Yes, I see my doctor once or twice a month.
The Secret Service agents file a report, but have no legal grounds to detain or arrest Byck. Shortly after the interview, Byck checks himself back into the hospital for psychiatric evaluation.
In his 4 years in office, Richard Nixon has visited...
When he gets out, he isolates himself from almost all social contact.
He spent hours in his apartment in northeast Philadelphia with nothing much to do. For a bright man, that kind of inactivity must have at a certain point become agonizing.
June 1973. The airwaves are filled with the Senate hearings on the Watergate affair.
There was a cancer growing on the presidency. And if the cancer...
Testimony from a Nixon aide implicates the president in a cover-up of the Watergate break-in.
That this cancer be removed immediately because it was growing more deadly every day.
The scandal is at the forefront of Byck's mind.
Be a broad overview of the situation.
The Watergate affair is a corruption in the government, a cancer in the government, and as I see it, the government does not have the ability nor the desire to correct this disease. So therefore, I will have to, in my own way, cut it out.
As the Watergate scandal drags on, there are calls for the president's impeachment from a few lawmakers and many in the general public. On October 6, 1973, Byck drives to Washington, D.C. to protest against President Nixon.
Impeach Nixon! Impeach the inflator now!
But in 1973, it's against the law to picket in front of the White House without a permit.
Can you see our identification? Do I need to have ID to exercise my constitutional rights?
The police run a background check on Byck and arrest him.
I don't understand what the big deal is. I had a sign and I was picking
In
it.
the past, you were interviewed for making threats against the President of the United States.
Those are just words.
The Secret Service has to walk a fine line in terms of threats against the president versus free speech. He didn't own a firearm. He had no history of violence. He was exercising his First Amendment rights in picketing the White House. And so none of that behavior would warrant direct attention from Secret Service. If it did, we'd have thousands and thousands of people in jail.
Okay, Mr. Byck. You're free to go.
I had no prior knowledge of the Watergate break-in. I neither took part in nor knew about any of the subsequent cover-up activities. I neither authorized nor encouraged subordinates to engage in illegal or improper campaign tactics. That was, and that is, the simple truth.
President Nixon has tonight discharged Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor in the Watergate case.
Byck is back in Philadelphia for one of the Watergate drama's most shocking events. On October 20th, 1973, President Nixon orders Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox fired. The Attorney General and Assistant Attorney General refused to carry out the order and resign in protest. The press later dubbed the event the Saturday Night Massacre. The country is outraged by Nixon's attempt to end the Watergate investigation. 3 days later, Sam Byck heads to Washington to join the chorus of dissent. And once again, he is arrested and released soon afterwards.
They'll just drop the charges like they did last time.
This time, the ACLU gets involved in Byck's defense.
I decided to clean the decks. I sold all my stock for $300,000. That's all I owe. I'm using roughly...
While Byck works with the ACLU, President Nixon defends himself against ethical concerns about his tax records and Watergate in one of the most famous presidential speeches of all time.
In all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
In late November 1973, Philadelphia Inquirer reporter Dan Lynch interviews Sam Byck about the ACLU's involvement in his court case.
Frankly, I was sort of flattered.
Really?
It's their first and only meeting. Byck wrote Lynch to suggest himself as a news story.
They had three.
Sam was funny. His sense of humor was slightly bawdy. He would say semi-outrageous things, and you found yourself liking him if you spent some time with him.
You would have thought the
Nothing about him struck me as dangerous. There was nothing in that first conversation that indicated Sam was a physical threat to anybody.
They had 3 squad cars for me.
I had my choice of squad cars.
I asked him what this was all about, and he told me. He made very clear that he hated Richard Nixon.
A couple weeks later.
The Philadelphia Inquirer runs Dan Lynch's story about Sam Byck on November 30th, 1973. A month later, on Christmas Eve, Byck returns to Washington.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
This time he pickets in a Santa Claus suit. Although the Secret Service is aware of his activity, he is not arrested.
In terms of evaluating Sam's potential to kill the president, they saw all of his parading and his Santa Claus get-up and whatnot as a way of relieving the pressure.
These tapes are being taped on January the 14th, on a Monday. And what I
Just days into 1974, Samuel Byck's tape recordings take a darker turn.
I'm not certain now as I am going through these tapes.
I know of some assassins who wrote in advance what they were going to do. I can't think of any who actually gave us an audio tape.
And what I plan to do will not occur.
During the January taping session, Byck describes a bizarre assassination plot.
My plan is simply this. I intend to skyjack a commercial airliner. I will then attempt to get the pilot to fly that plane to the target area, which is Washington, D.C. I will shoot the pilot and take control of the wheel and do my best to steer the plane into the White House.
January 1974. 44-year-old Samuel Byck, an unemployed tire salesman from Philadelphia, plots to assassinate President Richard Nixon. Byck details the reasoning behind his deadly plan into an audio cassette recorder.
My death will be Watergate connected. I mean, the fact that this government does not have the ability, nor I suspect the desire, to rectify itself, to cleanse itself, and I will cleanse it by fire.
Byck plans to drive from his apartment in Philadelphia to Baltimore Washington International Airport. There, he intends to hijack a jetliner.
What Sam pictured happening in terms of his success would be a very dramatic act of crashing an aircraft into the White House and people saying, oh my God, here's this great patriot who killed himself because he saw this vision for America, so we're going to have to follow his lead.
Hey, those tires I got last month, man, I got a blowout on them.
To carry out his plan, Byck needs a gun. He knows his only friend, Frankie Jones, owns a .22 caliber revolver. As with every step of his assassination plot, Byck documents his rationale for stealing his friend's gun on audio cassette.
But if it's any consolation to anybody, I feel that I would have killed somebody to get a gun. So by my stealing the gun, it probably saved the life of at least one more innocent victim.
Days before Byck plans to crash a jetliner into the White House, he's stunned by something he reads in the newspaper. At 2 a.m. on February 18th, 1974, an Army private from Fort Meade steals a Huey helicopter. The pilot repeatedly buzzes the White House and is chased by Maryland State Police helicopters. Eventually, shotgun-wielding agents on the ground pepper the chopper with so much buckshot that it is forced down on the White House lawn. Private Robert Preston is taken into custody. He stole the helicopter because the Army rejected him for flight training. The airspace around the White House is thought to be protected against such incidents by Air Force fighters and surface-to-air missiles. But no such action is taken against the intruding helicopter on February 18th, 1974. To Sam Byck, news of the helicopter landing on the White House lawn is proof his aerial assassination plan can work. But something about the newspaper headline angers him.
The headline in the Philadelphia Inquirer dealt with helicopter on Nixon's lawn. Sam called in a rage. He said, "That's not Nixon's lawn. That lawn belongs to the citizens of the United States of America." And I said, "You're absolutely right, Sam. I will speak to the people who wrote the headlines."
3 days after the helicopter incident, on February 21st, 1974, Samuel Byck makes his final preparations. He doesn't expect to survive his plot. He wills his car to his friend, Frankie Jones, and works at getting it in the best possible condition.
America's energy demands have grown so rapidly that they now outstrip our energy supplies.
President Nixon is unaware that he will become the target of an assassination plot the following day. Nixon meets with his cabinet to discuss the nation's energy crisis. Byck intends to use a .22 caliber revolver to take over the plane, but he also builds a homemade gasoline bomb to carry aboard. In his audio tapes, Byck describes his plan for the bomb, referring to the jetliner as a bird.
I don't know how much damage I can do by burning it with 2 gallons worth of gas, but we'll see. If I like my original plan, naturally, I have to steal a bird, but if I can't steal it, I'm going to cook it.
That kind of flammable liquid on a pressurized aircraft with that much oxygen would be a disaster.
During the afternoon of February 21st, 1974, President Nixon meets representatives from the Boy Scouts of America. They give him their 1974 annual report. Later that evening, just after midnight on February 22nd, 1974, Byck begins his 110-mile drive from Philadelphia to Baltimore Washington Airport.
I don't feel as nervous as I thought I should feel. This is the last day of my life, if all goes as according to plan.
I feel fine. Really fine.
From the very beginning of his trip, Sam Byck is running on empty. He's almost out of gas. Getting gas in early 1974 is not easy. The United States is in the midst of an OPEC oil embargo.
Buying gasoline usually was a 2 or 3 hour adventure. You would pull into a gas line and you would sit there hoping you wouldn't run out before you got to the gas pump.
Byck describes his frustration as he crosses over the Pennsylvania-Delaware state line, just 25 miles into his trip.
I just tried to get gasoline, $1 worth of gasoline from the Exxon station, the one stop before the bridge, and some young kid told me that he wouldn't sell me $1 worth of gasoline. This is really turning into quite a fascist state.
During the drive, Byck stops for gas 4 times, waiting in long lines, buying $1 at a time wherever he can. One station allows him to fill his plastic jugs, key components for his homemade bomb. At 4:45 a.m., Byck stops in Baltimore. He mails audio tapes of his plans to several well-known people, including Washington Post columnist Jack Anderson and polio vaccine developer Dr. Jonas Salk.
The tapes will go to people that I guess can be considered famous or well-known. I have admired your work and the stances that you have taken on certain issues. And that is why I would like you to have this tape, for what you read in the paper will not be sufficient.
He's assuming that these people are going to receive these tapes, be interested in him, and use their celebrity to discuss his ideas with other people or to publicize his ideas.
As Byck approaches Baltimore's BWI airport, his sense of humor contrasts with the violence he intends to unleash.
How about that? We're going to make it in with the needle touching empty, I guess. It'd be a hell of a thing if they didn't have any gas to have to wind up hitchhiking. A hitchhiker hijacks an airline. That would be beautiful.
Byck's joking gives way to grim resignation as he gathers his stolen gun and briefcase bomb.
Oh, well. I'm so punchy that I was about to say I'll be glad when this day is over, this night is over.
On the gloomy early Friday morning of February 22nd, 1974, Sam Byck carries a loaded gun and a homemade bomb into BWI Airport, determined to put his violent plan in motion.
Think about it. Nixon's the one.
February 22nd, 1974, 6:50 a.m. 44-year-old Samuel Byck enters Baltimore Washington Airport. He hides a .22 caliber revolver under his coat and a bomb in his briefcase. They are the tools of a dark mission. A mission to hijack a jetliner and crash it into the White House. Byck targets Delta Flight 523 because its gate is closest to the airport entrance. Maryland Aviation Administration police officer Neil Ramsberg is on duty at the gate's security checkpoint. Byck knows he can't get past the metal detector with his gun. He sees Officer Ramsberg as an obstacle to his mission.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to announce a general boarding call for Flight 523, service to Atlanta.
For a man about to hijack a plane, Samuel Byck is eerily calm.
Don't give me any trouble. I've got a bomb in my briefcase. I'm flying this plane to Washington.
Patrolman Charles Troyer is the first police officer on the scene.
It hurts seeing one of your own laying on the floor and full of blood. I knew he was mortally wounded. Nothing I could do for him.
With an active shooter in the aircraft, there's no time to wait for backup.
How many guys were there?
Just him. A man.
Troyer removes Officer Ramsberg's .357 Magnum, a much more powerful weapon than his own .38 caliber service revolver.
Went down the jetway.
I knew it was a better gun, and I didn't want somebody else to pick the gun up and take it or be behind me with another gun.
Just him.
Tell him anybody shows up, tell him I went down the jetway.
Pilot Reese Lofton and co-pilot Freddie Jones are trained to deal with hijackers. But nothing can prepare them for someone as irrational as Samuel Byck.
I want you to take off.
It's not that simple, sir. We have to get clearance from the tower.
Do you need clearance too?
No,
No, I don't. I'll just radio the tower and tell them we're leaving. Then we'll be on our way. Wherever you want to go, all right?
You, close the door.
Even with both pilots shot, Byck still expects to take off.
All right, stay behind the cover, man, and don't do anything until I tell you to. You got it?
Lieutenant Charles Miller leads the officers on the tarmac.
All right, listen to me, Beta.
I could look up to where the end of the plane, the cockpit area, but I could not see in it. It was too high up for me to see in.
In 1974, few police forces are prepared for the situation Samuel Byck has forced upon them.
Down here on the tarmac.
Maryland Aviation Police Officer Walter Bader is just 7 months out of the academy.
We were not trained to handle hijacking. We were trained to do urban policing, we were trained in traffic stops, we were trained in officer safety, in bank robberies. We could handle all of that stuff. We were not trained in how to handle a situation that we were going into.
Sir, yeah, Beta. What do I do if they start shooting? All right, Beta, listen to me. You're new.
Lieutenant Miller already knows he won't need his negotiating skills.
There would be no negotiation with him at that point because he'd already killed. There was other shots fired at that time, and that was a signal that he was either desperate or he was going to do whatever he had started to do, no matter what.
You cannot negotiate with an active shooter. He's not of a mode to pick up a phone and say hello, and so you've got to respond, with shooting.
The first-class flight attendant pretends to struggle with the door, even though the door is easily closed.
The door is heavy, but it would only take sliding the handle from right to left.
Flight attendant Cynthia Stovall and the passengers in the rear of the cabin are too far down the aisle to be aware of the bloodshed in the front of the plane.
I noticed something was off when it took the passengers too long to board the plane. He was rather calm, and the only thing he really said was, "What the hell are you standing there for? Go help her close that door."
Cynthia Stovall steps over what seems to be just a passenger briefcase left in the aisle.
I found out much later that the briefcase had a bomb in it, and I said, now just suppose I had just stepped on it or slipped and fell on it instead of just stepping over it.
Flight attendant Stovall soon realizes the first-class attendant is only pretending to have difficulty with the door. She wants to prevent the plane from taking off.
If the door had been closed, we may have been all killed.
He was only probably 10 foot from me, 12 feet at the most, from where I was standing. He just didn't see me peeking around the corner on me.
Don't look back.
I didn't see him, I just heard him. He said, when I say run, run.
I want the door closed. I'm going to count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
We got the door halfway closed, then all of a sudden, the officer said, run. The bullets were bouncing off the walls. The walls were literally vibrating with sound. It was deafening. The noise was so loud, I felt I had been shot.
Miraculously, the flight attendants are uninjured.
I was thinking about my friend, the other flight attendant, who was in the rear. who obviously wouldn't be able to escape.
None of the passengers knows the fate Samuel Byck has planned for them.
I will steer the plane into the White House.
7 a.m., February 22nd, 1974. In less than an hour, an assassin plans to crash a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 jetliner into the White House to kill President Richard Nixon.
Stay behind the cover. Don't do anything until I tell you to. You got it?
Hijacker and would-be assassin Samuel Byck is already aboard Flight 523 with a bomb and a gun. Both the pilot and co-pilot have gunshot wounds. A flight attendant and 10 hostages are trapped on board. Officer Charles Troyer has a direct view into the aircraft.
Copy. Coming down.
And I looked in and I saw a large white male, 6'1" to 6'3", probably, 260 pounds. And had a gun in his hand pointed at the cockpit.
Officers on the tarmac can't see much inside the cockpit, but what they can hear is chilling.
Hold it. I can hear him on the radio.
We could hear the conversation between the pilot and the tower. He kept his cool the whole time that he was talking to the ground control, and he was trying to pacify Byck as best he could to try to keep him from shooting any more people.
Go ahead. I'm too well shot. I don't know if I was dead or dying, and I'm all the way. I think you get somebody up the door that's not powered. It might help, but hurry, please hurry.
The situation becomes even more dire when officers hear the plane's engines rev.
Got it. I'm gonna pop. He's trying to leave. Sir, he's revving the engine. He's trying.
When we heard those engines rev, there was no doubt in our mind that there was going to be an attempt for that plane to leave that gate and leave that airport. And that decision had to be made whether it was going to leave or not.
That plane does not leave here. Understand me?
The procedure in dealing with a hijacked airplane on the ground is to keep it on the ground. Has this always happened? No. No, there have been hijacked airplanes in the United States that have been allowed to take off.
That plane, this is Lieutenant Miller. I need every man we have down here on the runway. We're going to try and shoot out the tires. Copy?
Copy, I'm coming down.
We were determined that the plane was not going to take off, and that's the reason why we ordered the tires to be shot out.
Right. Yeah. Now listen. Fire on my command. Ready? Shoot the tires. Hold your fire down.
The bullets don't appear to have any effect.
It's not working.
The only thing happens is bullets bounce back at me. Later I find out it's like 28-ply steel tires underneath the rubber, and it wouldn't have penetrated.
Don't do anything unless I give you an order. You got it?
Byck thinks the officers on the ground are firing at him. He uses a first-class passenger as a human shield. The DC-9's cockpit windows are made of 3 panes of impact-resistant glass. His small .22 caliber bullets barely leave the aircraft.
He shot the cockpit up, but there were bullet holes in the windshield. Byck meant business. And he was going to get what he wanted, no matter what it took.
Officers on the ground feel powerless to stop the killing.
I pointed my gun at the cockpit, and what was in my mind was, A, should I take a shot? Could I? Would it be safe? And then that glass is there, and that's always in your mind, that's whether it would even penetrate the glass.
Terrified passengers in the coach cabin decide to risk everything in an attempt to escape. 8 passengers exit onto the plane's wings. The flight attendant is the last to leave. Although the coach cabin is empty, 2 passengers remain trapped in the first-class section. Officer Troyer returns to the jetway to try and prevent Byck from killing the hostages. He puts his hope in the .357 Magnum he took from the body of Officer Ramsberg, the first victim of Byck's desperate plan.
I'd have fired that .38 of mine into that porthole, it would hit me back in the head. It would have bounced back.
But Officer Troyer isn't sure if the .357 will fare any better against the thick, double-pane plexiglass window.
I couldn't care less. You can't kill a dead man.
Just after 7 a.m., February 22nd, 1974. President Nixon begins a day that will include a meeting with his Secretary of the Interior, a conference with his economic advisors, and an assassination attempt on his life. The assassin is 30 miles away, aboard Delta Flight 523 at Baltimore, Washington Airport. 44-year-old Samuel Byck plans to kill Nixon by crashing the DC-9 jetliner into the White House. In the jetway, Officer Charles Troyer aims his .357 Magnum at Byck through the double-pane plexiglass window.
This plane off the ground now.
To 523, to tower. Departing the gate.
Negative. You have no clearance. Acknowledge.
Need clearance.
No, we won't. My name is Sam Byck. I'm taking over this airplane.
Clear the runway or everybody dies.
Fall back! Fall back! It's not work! Fall back!
Tower 523, we need a destination to clear airspace.
We're going to Washington, D.C.
Which airport? National or Dulles?
We'll find out in about 5 minutes.
The White House is just 30 miles from Baltimore, Washington International Airport. A mere 5 minutes by jet.
The structure of the White House was reinforced in FDR's presidency because the Secret Service sent a memo about possible Japanese air attacks. And they selected hardening the skylight windows, concreting them over, and hardening the structure as best they could because they expected planes might crash into it. I call it the Fortress Mansion because it's really the safest place that a president could be.
Repeat to 523. You are off course. Come in. Acknowledge. You are off course. Repeat. You are off course.
One grain of sand, any individual, be he rightist, leftist, deranged, whatever he may be, has within his power, within his willpower, to cause havoc amongst the leaders of any nation of the world.
523, you are off course.
I'm only a little ant amongst billions of ants in this world. And I'm sure that my life and my death can have meaning, but I'm going to try to give it meaning.
Repeat, you are off course. Acknowledge.
I can see the White House. Take me over it.
I don't know which is worse, to live without purpose or to die without a cause.
Samuel Byck's violent vision of an America forever changed ends where it began, in his delusional mind. In reality, the aircraft never leaves the gate.
If Byck had been successful in taking that jetliner into the White House, it would have been the crime of the century. It would have been a crime that would have been comparable to 9/11.
Part of the reason that those people who have psychotic motives fail is they lack the ability to put a whole plan together. He shot the pilot and the co-pilot. How was he ever going to get that plane off the ground? And let's not forget, he didn't get that plane off the ground.
Byck is hit twice in the chest. With his assassination plot a failure, Byck has nothing more to lose. But the remaining hostages have everything to lose, trapped with the increasingly desperate Samuel Byck.
That plane does not leave here, understand?
February 22nd, 1974, 7:10 a.m. at Baltimore Washington Airport.
One gunman, stick to the plan.
This is Troyer. Request help. Over.
Copy that, Troyer. We're on the way.
Hijacker Samuel Byck is aboard Flight 523. Wounded in the chest by 2 rounds from a .357 Magnum. His plan to crash a jetliner into the White House is a failure.
I'd rather live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep.
I think he had always been prepared to die. And the decision to kill himself when it became clear that this plan was not going to be successful probably was a decision he had made long before the events unfolded.
Despite 3 gunshot wounds, 1 self-inflicted to the head, Samuel Byck clings to life.
Check it out. Loaded weapon.
So I stepped on the gun so he couldn't, if he was faking, pick it up and shoot one of us. They kept him covered, and I removed the gun from his hand. And while I was down there, he said, "Help me."
Samuel Byck dies aboard Flight 523.
Clear the cabin.
Officers check the plane for other hijackers.
Hang on in there, guys. We got help coming soon.
The pilots fight to stay alive.
Call for some help.
Some more gasoline? Todd, check out the case.
But as police secure the scene, they are surprised to discover Byck's homemade bomb.
I was most frightened when I smelled the gasoline, because I knew we had already solved one problem and we really had another big problem. If there was a bomb on there, that was a big problem.
Slow. I got it.
Maryland Aviation Officer Lowell Todd volunteers to walk the bomb a safe distance from the plane. An Army bomb squad later safely detonates the bomb. Co-pilot Freddie Jones dies shortly after being evacuated from the plane. He is just 32 years old. Pilot Reese Lofton endures nearly a year of surgeries, but survives. 5 years later, he resumes his career as an airline pilot. For his bravery and quick thinking, Officer Charles Troyer is named Policeman of the Year by the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police.
Officer Troyer acted well above what most people would have done. I put him in for accommodation the next day.
Officer Neil Ramsberg, age 25, dies at the scene, leaving behind grieving parents and a fiancé. Later that day, police find Byck's car in the airport parking lot. In the trunk, authorities locate Byck's tape recorder.
And any one of these steps, you'll know where I was headed for. That way, if I'm stopped, halted...
When they listen to the tapes, they learn Byck's plan extends beyond a simple hijacking and includes a kamikaze assassination plot.
Skyjack, a commercial airline.
When we heard the tapes and found out exactly what Byck was intending to do, was a sense of relief that the plane did not get off the ground.
At the White House, Byck's assassination attempt has no impact on President Nixon's schedule. Few people ever learn about the dark intentions of Samuel Byck and how close he came to realizing them. Most of the morning papers fail to mention his ultimate destination.
There may have been conscious attempts to minimize the publicity of the plan. The purpose of minimizing the publicity of a plan is to try to prevent imitation and extrapolation.
I think the reason the Byck case didn't get that much publicity outside of the Washington, D.C. area is because it was an anomaly. He was just one crazy guy who tried to hijack a plane, and even at that, did a lousy job.
Remarkably, the news media never interview major participants in the event, like flight attendant Cynthia Stovall.
I just had never discussed it with anybody other than my family. I had never had the opportunity to really tell the story, and I felt nobody really cared.
In their investigation, federal authorities failed to interview key witnesses who knew Byck in his final days.
I think I would have felt better if the FBI or the Secret Service had come to me and said, "Excuse me, were you an accomplice in this? Did you know something about it?" But they never did.
In the wake of the Samuel Byck incident, several airports, including BWI, improved security. They moved metal detectors away from the gates and repositioned them at concourse entrances. While airports beef up security, no new precautions are taken to safeguard the White House from aerial attack.
The authorities never really had to confront the question of what they would do if a hijacked plane came hurtling into some public building like the White House, being used as a missile.
But many experts believe secret measures long in place would make a Samuel Byck-style assassination attempt impossible. Within moments of learning of an incoming aircraft, the Secret Service would whisk the president into a bunker designed to withstand nuclear attack. Then authorities would confront the airborne threat.
Sir, we have a theater launch.
Military interceptor planes would try to communicate with Byck's plane and try to talk it down or see what it was doing. Failing that, it's probably going to be taken out for sure. It's just a question of whether the fighters do it or the surface-to-air missiles do it.
Even if Byck retained the element of surprise, the White House is one of the most fortified buildings in the world.
Probably no explosive short of nuclear could kill the president directly by landing on the White House because the structure is so sound.
I would have preferred to carry through to the finish, whatever the personal agony it would have involved. But the interests of the nation...
Ironically, 6 months after Byck's attempt to end Richard Nixon's presidency, Nixon resigns from office because of the Watergate scandal.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first.
Samuel Byck becomes an obscure and bizarre footnote in American history.
I don't feel as nervous as I thought I should feel.
Almost as unknown in death as he was in life.
Yeah. The last day of my life, if all goes as according to plan.
His only legacy is the audio tapes documenting the inner workings of a disturbed mind and a failed assassin.
And I will cleanse it by fire.
Myself, that's for damn sure.